Hi everyone, welcome to Infinite Women. I'm Allison, and today we're talking about two U.S. Civil War spy mistresses on opposite sides of the conflict. I do have a much longer conversation with Deanne Blanton from the podcast about women in the Civil War more broadly, if you want to go check that out. And the following is an excerpt from my book, The View from the Hill, Women Who Made Their Mark After 40, which I will also link down below. The Union had Elizabeth Van Lew, a Virginia socialite whose education at a Quaker school in the North may have contributed to her anti-slavery beliefs and support for the Union later in life. While active in the Richmond social scene, she never married. Although her family owned enslaved people, Van Lew's mother Eliza freed some of them after her father's death, and Van Lew would spend her inheritance helping her family's former slaves, and on her espionage during the war. Working within the confines of Virginia's complicated slavery laws, she and her mother did what they could, allowing the enslaved to live elsewhere and work for an income. They paid for one girl, Mary Jane, to receive an education in New Jersey, and then become a missionary in Liberia. Maintaining this delicate balance between her morals and public sentiment would prove vital to Van Lew's efficacy as a spy. Born in 1818, Elizabeth Van Lew was in her 40s when tensions boiled over into war in 1861. Obtaining permission to take food and provisions to Union soldiers at Libby Prison in the name of charitable benevolence, mother and daughter worked with other sympathizers to pass messages in and out of the prison, get the men additional food and water, and help them escape at great risk and expense to the women. Maintaining their pretense, they made sure to be seen publicly helping Confederate soldiers, including boarding the prison warden. After hearing about the Van Lew's work in December 1863, General Benjamin Butler recruited Elizabeth as a spy. She built a network of a dozen agents, both Caucasian and African American, including Mary Jane, who had returned from Liberia in 1860, and whose names included Mary Richards, Mary J.R. Garvin, Mary Denman, and Mary Bowser. Mary Jane worked as a servant for the family of Confederacy President Jefferson Davis in the Confederate White House, collecting information and passing it on to Van Lew and other spies. Although Van Lew received acknowledgement from General Ulysses S. Grant and a small stipend after the war, her funds were depleted and her social standing forever ruined, her former friends branding her a spy and traitor, as well as crazy, eccentric, and mad, leading to the moniker Crazy Bet. During Grant's presidency, she was made Postmaster of Richmond from 1869 to 77, promoting suffrage and civil rights, and hiring many African Americans and women. She also sponsored a library for African Americans, which opened in Richmond in 1876. From 1883 to 87, she worked as a clerk in the postmaster's office, but quit after being demoted and paid less than men in equivalent positions. Her mother, Eliza Van Lew, died in 1875, age 77, while Van Lew herself lived until 1900. While the Van Lews were busy at Libby Prison and beyond, another woman in her 40s, Rose O'Neal Greenhow, was working for the Confederacy. Like the Van Lews, she hid her espionage behind the veneer of a society lady. After marrying a prominent scholar in 1835, she became one of Washington, D.C.'s most powerful women, a well-regarded hostess among the elite, and confidant to major political players. A staunchly pro-slavery Southerner, she stayed in D.C. after the Civil War began, and was soon recruited to spy for the Confederacy, building a multi-state network of 48 women and 2 men. She warned the Confederate Army about Union plans to consolidate their troops and advance on Manassas in Virginia. Thanks to her work, the First Battle of Manassas was a Confederate victory. Although she was arrested only a month later and confined to her home, she was still able to smuggle information from there, and later from Old Capitol Prison after she was moved there in January 1862. It didn't help that other sympathizers and spies were also imprisoned in her home, which became known as Fort Greenhow. Even in a real prison, she was able to sneak in a Confederate flag, waving it from her window. Examined by a War Department commission that March, there was plenty of incriminating evidence, but officials were afraid that she would embarrass important people and or reveal government secrets if she was placed on trial publicly. Instead, she was exiled in June to the South, where she was welcomed as a hero and rewarded by Jefferson Davis. She traveled to France and Britain in 1863 to promote the Confederate cause, and published her prison diary, My Imprisonment and the First Year of Abolition Rule at Washington, later that year. Unlike the Van Lews, Greenhow did not survive the war. In October 1864, she tried to get past the federal blockade at Wilmington, North Carolina. Attempting to evade Union ships, her boat ran aground. To avoid capture, Greenhow and two fellow agents took a rowboat, trying to reach the shore. She might have survived when the rowboat capsized, but for the gold. At the time, she had been carrying $2,000 worth of it on her person to be smuggled to the Confederacy. Her body was recovered several days later, and she was buried with full military honors. Join us next time on Infinite Women, and remember, well-behaved women rarely make history.